The sheriff just got caught, not in a theory, not in a rumor someone posted on Reddit at 2 in the morning. Caught in official documents, public records, the kind of paperwork that doesn't lie and doesn't disappear no matter how many years you let pass. And here's what makes this different from everything else you've seen about this case. This isn't about one mistake. It isn't about pressure getting to someone. What the records show is something that was buried, deliberately, quietly, successfully, for over 40 years. A secret that survived 2 elections, dozens of press conferences, and a national spotlight. A secret that only came out because one newspaper decided to pull the thread. The man standing at that podium, speaking for the search for Nancy Guthrie, the man who has been on NBC, on Fox, D's on the Today Show telling the country he is definitely closer. That man has been lying about who he is since before most of the people watching this video were born. And when they asked him about it, he didn't deny it. He didn't explain it. He said 6 words and walked away. Those 6 words tell you everything about why this case is in the trouble it's in. Stay with me, because what comes next does not get better. It gets worse. Everything you are about to hear is sourced. The Arizona Republic, one of Arizona's most established newspapers, obtained official employment records, not leaks, not anonymous tips, not forum speculation. Documents. The kind that sit in government filing cabinets and don't change based on who's asking. Newsweek independently confirmed key details. Reuters reported on accusations that came from within the investigation itself. The New York Post published statements from inside the sheriff's own department. This channel does not traffic in theories. Every claim in this script has a named outlet and a named source behind it. If something is alleged, we will say so. If something is confirmed, we will say that too. That distinction matters here. It matters a lot. 40 days, Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, taken from her home in Tucson's Catalina foothills in the early hours of February 1st. Her blood was found on the porch. Her doorbell camera was physically removed. Her pacemaker app went dark at 2:28 in the morning. A masked man carrying a Walmart backpack was captured on footage, armed. The family put up $1 million. The FBI added 100,000 more. So tens of thousands of tips have come in, hundreds of thousands of hours of footage reviewed. Beat, nobody has been charged, no suspect publicly named, no arrest anywhere on the horizon. The man running the local side of this investigation is Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. He has appeared on every major network. He has given briefing after briefing, and when NBC asked him directly if investigators were closer to finding whoever did this, he said, and this is a direct quote, "I think investigators are definitely closer." That's it. Definitely closer. No timeline, no specifics. The same phrase recycled since week 2. Now, what if the reason this investigation looks the way it looks isn't just about resources or complexity or bad luck? What if it starts at the top? What if it starts with who Chris Nanos actually is versus who he's been telling everyone he is? The Arizona Republic did what nobody in Arizona law enforcement or politics had done in 4 decades. They pulled the records, not from Tucson, from El Paso. Before Chris Nanos was the sheriff of Pima County, before he was a public face on national television, before he ran for office and won and stood in front of cameras and talked about justice and accountability, he was a police officer at the El Paso Police Department in Texas. That part is on his resume. That part he's happy to talk about. His years in law enforcement, his background, his experience. He's built a career on that identity. What is not on his resume, what has never been on his resume, never been disclosed, or never been mentioned in any interview or any campaign or any press conference in over 40 years of public life, is how his time at El Paso PD actually ended. According to the documents the Arizona Republic obtained, Chris Nanos did not finish his time at El Paso PD. He did not submit a resignation letter and move on. He resigned in lieu of termination. That phrase, resigned in lieu of termination, is the official language police departments use when they are about to fire someone but give them one final chance to walk away before the word fired is attached to their name permanently. It is not a kindness, it is an institutional calculation, The department gets the separation it needs. The officer gets to avoid the formal record of termination. And unless someone pulls the documents, the public never knows the difference. Nanos chose to walk. In 1982, his resume listed his departure from El Paso PD as 1984. The official records say 1982. That is not a typo. That is not a formatting error. That is 2 years, 2 full years, quietly erased from a professional history that he has used to ask voters to trust him with one of the largest sheriff's departments in America. For 40 years, nobody went back to check. Nobody pulled the El Paso records. Nobody asked why the dates didn't line up. And Chris Nanos never offered to explain it because he never had to. Until now. When a reporter from the Arizona Republic went back to El Paso, they didn't just find a discrepancy in dates. They found a disciplinary file. And what was inside that file reframes everything, every press conference, every definitely closer, every moment he has stood at that podium and asked this country to trust him. One incident is explainable. A rough patch, a bad year, something a person can grow out of and leave behind. What the Arizona Republic found in those El Paso records is not one incident. It is a file. And a file tells you who someone is when they think no one is watching. Let's go through what was actually in there. Insubordination. That's where the record starts. In a police department, an institution built entirely on chain of command, on rank, on the premise that officers follow the direction of those above them, insubordination is not a minor infraction. It doesn't mean someone had a bad day. It means someone decided the rules did not apply to them. That the people above them in the chain of command did not have the authority they actually had. And it was documented. Formally, officially, not once. That alone would be a data point. But the file doesn't stop there. Excessive force. There is a finding of excessive force in those records, and this matters in 2 directions at once. First, it tells you something about how Nanos handled power in the field, about what happened when he had physical authority over another person and a decision to make. Second, and this is the part that connects directly to the case he is running right now, it tells you about his relationship with accountability. An excessive force finding means someone looked at what he did and said formally, "This was too much." The question that always follows that kind of finding is whether the officer heard that message, and whether it changed anything. The rest of this file suggests it didn't. There was a separate incident involving a shot fired, not part of the excessive force finding, its own entry, its own documentation, its own place in the record. 2 incidents involving the use of force documented separately in the same file. Off-duty gambling, listed as its own disciplinary matter, not a technicality, not a procedural footnote. The department considered his conduct outside of working hours serious enough to address formally and put in writing. Tardiness, documented, repeated, significant enough to make the official record of an officer whose department was already building a case against him. And then there is the finding that may be the most damning of all, not because it describes one incident, but because it describes a career pattern across time, across evaluations, across different circumstances. The official language in those records includes a finding of consistent inefficiency. Consistent. That word is doing everything. It means this wasn't a bad week. It wasn't a rough patch. It means that over time, evaluated by different supervisors in different contexts, the same conclusion kept appearing. And someone in that department decided to write it down, officially, permanently. The final breaking point, the incident that appears to have pushed El Paso PD to the point of termination, was an arrest gone wrong. According to the records, Nanos was suspended for 15 days without pay after allegedly injuring a robbery suspect during an arrest. 15 days, not a written warning, not a note in the file. 15 days of your paycheck gone because of what happened when you had a handcuffed person in your custody. The case went to a grand jury. Let that register for a moment. The circumstances of that arrest were serious enough that a grand jury was convened to determine whether criminal charges were warranted. The grand jury declined to indict. Nanos was not criminally charged, but the fact that it got that far, that what happened during that arrest required formal review for potential criminal accountability is not a footnote in the record. It is the culmination of everything that came before it. When you add the total suspension days accumulated across his time at El Paso PD, the number is 37 days without pay. 37 days, multiple incidents, multiple findings, a grand jury review, and then in 1982, the department made its decision, and Chris Nanos resigned before they could make it for him. He has been carrying every one of those 37 days and everything they represent into every room he has ever walked into as a law enforcement professional, every press conference, every election, every time he has stood at a podium and asked someone to trust him. Nobody knew until the Arizona Republic pulled the file. And now, everyone does. When the Arizona Republic went to Chris Nanos for comment, when they told him what they had found, when they laid out the records, when they gave him the chance to respond to a 40-year-old discrepancy on his own professional resume, he had real options. He could have been honest. He could have said he was young, that he made mistakes, that the decades of work he has done in Tucson since then speak for themselves. He could have acknowledged the records and offered context. He could have expressed regret. Any of those responses would have been something a person can evaluate, sit with, and decide what to do with. Some people would have accepted it, some wouldn't, but it would have been a human response to a legitimate question. Instead, here is what Chris Nanos, the sheriff of Pima County, the man leading the search for an 84-year-old woman missing for 40 days, wrote back to the Arizona Republic when they presented him with official employment records that contradicted his own resume. "That's your urgent request? You sure you don't want to go back to my high school and ask why I got swatted from the principal? Good luck with your hit piece." Read that again. A reporter asked about official government documents showing a 2-year gap in his employment history and a disciplinary file that ended in a forced resignation. And the sheriff of Pima County compared it to high school, mocked the question, and called it a hit piece. That was not a man caught off guard. That was a man who has spent 40 years counting on nobody pulling those records. And when someone finally did, he had nothing. No explanation, no accountability, no acknowledgement. Just contempt. After the story ran, the Pima County Sheriff's Department released a statement. They did not deny the records. They did not challenge the reporting. What they said was that the inaccurate dates on the sheriff's resume were the result of, and this is their phrase, 2 clerical errors. 2 clerical errors. 1982 became 1984. A 2-year gap that survived 40 years, 2 elections, and a national spotlight, explained as a typo. They quietly updated the resume, corrected the dates, and moved on. If that response pattern sounds familiar, it should, because it is the same pattern that has appeared throughout this investigation. When the facts don't match the official account, adjust the account, say as little as possible, and move forward as if nothing happened. Knowing who Chris Nanos is doesn't just change how you see his past, it changes how you see every decision made in this investigation from day one. Start with the crime scene. The morning after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, her home was a crime scene. Blood on the porch, a doorbell camera torn from the wall, evidence of something violent and deliberate. Securing that scene, establishing a perimeter, controlling who gets near the physical evidence, is the most basic, non-negotiable first step of any criminal investigation. It is not advanced technique, it is day one, hour one. According to reporting from the Arizona Republic and multiple other outlets, the initial perimeter was so inadequate that members of the press could walk close enough to Nancy Guthrie's home to see her blood, on the porch, visible to reporters. On February 5th, Nanos acknowledged it. He said if he had a do-over, he would have preserved the scene longer. He said his team got what they thought was complete. An officer who was disciplined repeatedly for consistent inefficiency, who accumulated 37 days of suspension over the course of a single career at one department, that officer doesn't automatically become a different leader when he gets to the top of a bigger one. Character is not a thing that resets with a title. Then there is the DNA. Evidence recovered from the crime scene included mixed DNA profiles, samples from multiple individuals requiring advanced processing. For evidence of that complexity in a case of this profile, Forensic experts have been consistent about where it should go. The FBI's laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. Direct access to CODIAS, the National Genetic Database, the most capable federal forensic infrastructure in the country. Nanos sent it to a private laboratory in Deerfield Beach, Florida. BDNA Labs International. Forensic experts who commented publicly on the case criticized this decision. The fastest path from a mixed DNA sample to a usable match runs through federal resources. That path was not taken. An officer whose record includes a finding of consistent inefficiency, who is documented over time as someone who did not meet institutional standards, does not automatically become someone who optimizes the critical decisions when the pressure is highest. The private lab decision fits a pattern. The pattern was already documented in El Paso. The family clearance is the one that deserves its own moment because it goes to something more fundamental than process. During the early days of the investigation, Nanos publicly announced that all members of the Guthrie family had been cleared as potential suspects. A standard practice, necessary step, appropriate to announce once the evidence supports it. The DNA results from the crime scene had not come back yet when he made that announcement. He announced the clearance before the evidence existed to support it. Results are supposed to inform conclusions. In this investigation, the conclusion came first. Then there is what was reported by Reuters, an accusation that Nanos withheld evidence from the FBI. Nanos denied it. His words to Tucson's NBC affiliate KVOA were that it was not even close to the truth. We do not have independent confirmation that evidence was actually withheld. What we have is a reported accusation from Reuters and a denial. That is the full record on that specific point. But a denial does not exist in isolation. It lands inside everything already established. I'm inside the private lab, inside the premature clearance, inside the unprotected crime scene, inside the 37 days of suspension in El Paso, inside, good luck with your hit piece. And then there's the statement that, once you know the full context, sounds less like a clumsy remark and more like an accidental confession. On February 3, 2026, early in the investigation, Nanos said this at a press conference. I'm not used to everybody hanging on my words and then trying to hold me accountable for what I say. He said that while an 84-year-old woman was missing, while the country was watching. He is not used to being held accountable. And when you look at 40 years of a falsified resume sitting unchallenged in his professional history, you understand that he was telling the exact truth. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She needs daily medication. She has limited mobility. She was taken in the early hours of a Sunday morning, a time chosen, investigators believe, because her routine was known. Her church live stream would have given whoever took her 12 to 14 hours before anyone noticed she was gone. Her daughter flew back to New York, not because the search was over, not because she was giving up. She went back long enough to hug her coworkers, people who had been holding space for her for 40 days, and then she turned around and came back to Arizona. Because that is where her mother is. That is where the answers have to come from. $1 million from the family, $100,000 from the FBI, 40 days, and she is still out there. Whatever you feel right now about Chris Nanos and his record and his decisions, hold that feeling. And then hold Nancy Guthrie next to it, because she is the reason any of this matters. We are not saying Chris Nanos took Nancy Guthrie. We are not saying his record at El Paso PD is the sole reason this case has stalled. We are not saying every person working this investigation has failed. There are federal agents, forensic specialists, and investigators whose work we cannot evaluate from the outside and who may be closer to a resolution than any public reporting reflects. What we are saying is narrower than that, and it is entirely supported by what has already been documented in this script. The man leading the local side of this investigation carried a falsified resume for 40 years. The falsification was discovered not because he came clean, but because a newspaper pulled records. His response to being confronted with those records was contempt and deflection. His department's official explanation for a 2-year discrepancy was clerical error. And the documented failures in this investigation, the unprotected crime scene, the private lab, the premature clearance, each fit a character pattern that was formally recorded in El Paso in 1982. Those are the facts. Every single one of them sourced. Draw your own conclusions. There is a question that nobody in Tucson's law enforcement infrastructure, nobody in Arizona's political establishment, and nobody inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department is willing to ask out loud. Given the documented failures in this investigation, given the unprotected crime scene, given the private lab over Quantico, given the premature family clearance, given the accusation of withholding evidence from the FBI, denied but reported by Reuters, given a forced resignation from his previous law enforcement job that he quietly erased from his resume for 40 years, given 37 days of documented suspensions, given good luck with your hit piece. Is Chris Nanos the right person to be leading this? The Pima County Board of Supervisors has that authority. The governor's office can ask it. The FBI's chain of command can ask it privately, even if they won't ask it publicly. The people who have the institutional power to put that question on the table, formally, officially on the record, are not doing it. The Guthrie family, out of dignity and strategic necessity, will not ask it directly. They are working within the system because the system is what they have. So the question falls to the people watching, to the people who have been following this case since the first press conference, to the people who shared the tip line and donated and kept the story alive when the news cycle wanted to move on. Your attention is not passive, it is pressure. When enough people are asking the same question loudly enough that it cannot be ignored, that is when institutions move. That is when oversight happens. That is when someone in a position of power decides that the cost of silence is higher than the cost of accountability. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 40 days. She is 84 years old. She needs medication. She has a daughter who flew back to Arizona because that is where the answers have to come from. The answers have to come from somewhere. The question is whether the person at the top of the chain is capable of finding them. And that question, that specific documented sourced question, deserves to be asked out loud by enough people that it cannot stay quiet. If this video gave you something you didn't have before, share it. Not for this channel, for Nancy. Every person who watches this is one more person asking the question that needs to get loud enough to demand an answer. Drop a comment below and tell us which detail from Nanos's El Paso record hits the hardest for you. We read every single one. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The next video goes directly into the surveillance blackout, the January 11th sighting, and what a real path to solving this case looks like from here. You do not want to miss that one. Nancy Guthrie deserves answers. Stay in the circle of people demanding them.